Hello, so welcome to our training all about neuro-linguistic programming, which is a huge topic, and we are literally just going to scratch the surface with an overall view of some of the techniques it includes and a handful of ones you probably already know about, but you've not necessarily thought of them as neuro-linguistic programming ones, a couple of new techniques as well, which is always nice, and just some of the background as well, so it makes a little bit more sense. It's a training that you'll probably want to take notes to make some sense of it in your mind, and then towards the end it will be a little bit more interactive so that you actually have a technique to walk away with. Okay, so I'll be wearing my glasses because most of it I will need to be reading from scripts. Neurolinguistic programming is actually quite precise in very many ways. So let's start first of all with a definition. The definitions are huge and varied. Neurolinguistic programming is really about excellence. It's about really finding tools to help you master your mindset and your behavior. You could look and find 101 different definitions. So one I like is that neurolinguistic programming is a study of excellence and tools designed to help you master your mind, deepen your self-understanding, and help you feel and perform at your best. All right, but it's also described as the art on and science of communication, to read you a few more others. It's described as what makes you and others tick. It's described as the route to getting the results you want. It's described as lots of different things. The initials NLP, which is what it's more familiarly known as, stands for neuro, which is all to do with your neurology, all to do with the nerves and how they send signals and how they communicate, not only in your brain, but throughout your body through neurotransmitters and all that kind of thing. The linguistics, so the L, is, as perhaps the name describes, more about language. It's all about the language we use to communicate with ourselves and with one another. And the P, the programming, is all about then how we program our minds with the language we want or need or use to get the behaviors and results we want. So that's how it all pieces together. So you might be surprised to already know that those of you who've been through any of my programs and worked together will have already used NLP, probably without even knowing it. I was using it for years without really even knowing I was using it, just because I'd built up a huge array of different tools and techniques that crossed over with neuro-linguistic programming. So any of you who've done the energy release process, for example, where we talk a lot about visualization, sensations, and bringing auditory sound and things like that into it, because neurolinguistic programming brings in the senses. It's just not about vision and thoughts. It's about all our senses all together and how that makes up our map of the world and our experience of the world. So that's one way you may have already used it. You may have used it in visualization techniques. I, for one, I know talk a lot about visualization. It's a hugely powerful result. Technique, and it doesn't necessarily have its origins in neurolinguistic programming, but it crosses over a huge amount. There's a lot of visualization used in neurolinguistic programming, so that's another way you may have used it. A lot of the coaching tools, things like when we say shift your perspective to thinking as though you're the other person, or shifting your perspective to gratitude as opposed to fear or anxiety, all those perspective shifts are all neuro-linguistic programming kind of techniques, okay? So lots of ways that you will have already used it without really even knowing that that's what you were doing. A little bit like I taught Pilates for years and years and introduced yoga into it just as more stretchy type moves. I didn't realize, my students didn't realize that they'd been doing yoga for years. So it's really just elaborating on what, on the text, some of it is elaborating on the techniques you already know, so that you actually know that actually you already have been using some neurolinguistic programming. However, there are also techniques that can take it further than some of the ones we've already used. And NLP has been growing since about the 1970s. It was first in one of the universities that they were looking at like really successful people and what made them tick and what made them successful. What were the attributes of those people? And they gradually started working with psychologists, psychotherapists to build up profiles of these people. And then gradually the techniques elaborated, and then the coaching world, the early life coaches, people like Tony Robbins uses a lot of NLP, got hold of it, and then it became more of a progressive technique as opposed to a purely therapeutic technique. So that's why I love it, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be in that therapeutic branch where people are thought to have something wrong with them. People, it can have quite a negative connotation when you link it to therapy, whereas if you link it towards growth and progression and performance, then it can have more of a positive connotation with it. So you can think of it in either ends. You know, if you look at who goes to a neuro-linguistic programming training, you'll have an array of people, from therapists and coaches, but also, interestingly, people like salespeople. One of my trainers was saying that 50% of her coaching room was full of estate agents, which I find fascinating. So we're being manipulated the whole time in very many ways, whether it's advertising or the way people talk to us. So you will hear the word manipulation in NLP, but it's in the most positive way. If we're going to be manipulated, then let's manipulate ourselves in ways that help us as opposed to destroy us. Okay, so that's a little bit about the background, the basics of the background. And it's going to be worth us just delving in to one or two techniques that can perhaps help us with things like limiting beliefs and pain as well. So they're the two that we're going to dive into. And just so you can start to see how the body and mind integrate. But if you've worked with me for any length of time, you already know this. But perhaps if you're new to my work, if you take your finger and thumb, put them together in your finger and thumb of your other hand and lock them in between. And just think of someone you really, really like or love, and try and pull the fingers together. And you may find it's quite a solid lock. Yeah? And now bring to mind, just for a minute, someone you don't particularly like, you don't particularly get on with, perhaps someone who triggers you. And then see if the lock holds or not. And you may find it's not quite as strong, because subconsciously it's telling our muscles to behave in a certain way. So it gets really, really fascinating. I find how when you think of your beliefs about someone, for example, that one was, and how that makes you feel in your body subconsciously, you've not told your hands to release more easily, but it's just what happens. And that's where the neurology and the language and the programming all come in. So that's in quite a physical way. It can just be quite nice to demonstrate how that can work in your body. Okay, so the next bit is going to be more practical. So you might want to start to just relax into your chair, get comfortable, as we start to explore a really simple technique about limiting beliefs. And before we go into this, I want to describe the word, I think it is called submodalities. I want to make sure I get the wording right, because neurolinguistic programming is all sorts of words, and this is why I often don't teach it as NLP, because you don't need to know all the words. It's like yoga, you don't need to know all the Sanskrit. It just makes it more interesting and richer gradually as you start to know more about it, to know a little bit about more the nitty gritty. So the submodalities are really your senses. A submodality could include the location. So if any of you have done this energy release process that I do, we'll look at what location it is in your body. We will look at another submodality can be the sounds. Another submodality can be the colors or an object or image that it brings to mind. Okay, so just so that you know that if I talk about submodalities, that's what I'm talking about, are all these different senses. And I'll just check in my book if there are any others as well. It can be the brightness as well. So a picture can either be quite dull or it can be very, very bright. It can be focused or fuzzy. It can be framed or panoramic. Things about the auditory submodalities, they can be words or sounds. The volume can be loud or soft. The tone could be gentle or fierce. The pitch, the constant, things can be constant or intermittent. They can have a rhythm or a tune. More the kinesthetic things, so the location, you can have pressure or intensity or temperature associated with them. So all those kind of things help really bring images alive. Okay, so that's a little bit about submodalities. So that will kind of think, well, that's not really making very much sense. Don't worry, it's just so that you know a little bit more about it. So we're going to start to tune in to a limiting belief that you currently hold. Just bring one to mind. I wouldn't go for one that's too deep and kind of potentially traumatic. Just go for one that's a little bit more superficial. Okay? And then you're going to think of a belief that you used to believe in. And one here can be something like, I used to believe in Father Christmas, or I used to believe in the Tooth Fairy, something like that. All right, so something quite trivial, okay? And then you are going to think of, when you think of this fictional character, this fictional belief, it's one that makes you feel good, okay? The belief that you used to feel. So we're going to with one that used to make you feel good. So you're going to imagine where that is. Is it on your right side? Is it high? Is it low? Where exactly is it for you? And how does it make you feel? Does it kind of make you feel fluttery with excitement? Does it make you feel just this excitement, this anticipation? How does it make you feel? So just being aware of that. Keep your eyes closed a second. And then think of your limiting belief. And think of the sensations or the submodalities that we've just described of that limiting belief. How does it look? How does it sound? How does it feel? Just bring it to your senses for a second. And then think of your limiting belief and put it in to the submodalities of the belief you used to believe in. So you're taking the one you currently believe in. And if you saw that one you used to believe in the future or to the right side, for example, wherever you felt it, take your limiting belief there and just put with that there at the moment. You're going to then bring the submodalities of that old positive belief that you've moved through, and you're going to link it to this current limiting belief. And you're going to now make sure you move the picture to exactly the same position. So wherever you found your current limiting belief, you're moving it. You're moving it to the position of where the belief you've moved through was conjured up for you. And see if it feels different. Take a deep breath. And release. 3 of those. Deep breath in of that new belief, and then release out any that aren't serving you. Okay? So that's technique number 1. That's to put the old belief into the place of a belief that you've moved through. Okay? NLP, some of it is really weird. Some of it won't make any sense for you, but it works. Some of it won't make any sense for you and it won't work. So you pick and choose, you cherry pick like you did at the pick and mix shop at the sweet shop when you were little. All right. Different techniques resonate with different people because we are all different. You maybe heard like with your kids, if any of you have kids, some are very visual learners, some are very auditory learners, some are very kinesthetic. They have to feel it to understand it. We're all different, and that's why different techniques work for different people. So you don't have to force a technique to work. Sometimes you do have to repeat it several times to make it work. Sometimes the first time it just doesn't make sense to you, whereas when you've done it 2 or 3 times, it makes perfect sense. So whichever's true for you is fine. There's nothing, you can't be wrong with this. It can just not feel like it's a very beneficial technique at worst, or it can work wonderfully well and clear your limiting belief at best. All right, so wherever you are on that spectrum is just fine. There's no right or wrong. Okay, we're going to now move into creating more of an empowering belief. All right, so go back into that place where your eyes were closed, and you're going to think of a belief that would be really useful for you to have. So a desired belief. So I deserve to be successful, something like that. And then tune into a belief that you absolutely know is true, like the sun will set this evening. You just know that will happen, whether you see it or not, the clouds are there or not, you know it will happen. And then you're going to identify the submodalities, so those sensations, all those sensations, those positions, etc., of the true belief, so the sun setting. So, for example, if you think of it, you may think of it in front of you, about half a mile away. You may have certain colours that come to mind. You may have certain sensations in you of how it makes you feel, whether that's grateful or at peace or just very present. You might hear the garden sounds that you hear at that time in the evening. You're just being very observant of what you notice about this belief you have about the sun setting. And it would be based on your experience of the sun setting. So now you're going to put your desired belief into the exact same submodalities of the absolutely true belief. So you're going to move the picture you get when you think of your desired belief to the same position and distance of that belief you have about the sun setting. Give it the same colors, brightness, sounds, and then produce the same feelings of warmness, presence, gratitude. And breathe that in. Breathe in that new belief and those sensations. Release out anything that isn't serving you. Do that 3 times. Almost like you've set it in your body. Okay. And now we're going to do one final technique that's a little bit different, which is about any aches and pains in your body. All right, can be used for all different ones. So I'll give the example of back pain, but if back pain's not your thing, it can be any pain in your body. All right, so just reset, stand up, move around as need be. And then when you're ready, you come back to your position where you're comfortable for the next 3 or 4 minutes. It's quite a short technique. Okay, so when you're sitting comfortably, you're going to bring to mind, it can be, I'll use the example of pain, but it can be an unpleasant feeling as well. So an unpleasant feeling or pain, I'm going to use the example of back pain. And calibrate that pain on a scale of 0 to 10. So 0 being none, and 10 being really severe pain or sensation, whatever you're working on, of how it is right now. Are you going to make a picture of that back pain or sensation? And you're going to use the submodalities. So is it in black and white? Is it in colour? What's the sensation? Are there any sounds associated with it? Are there any words associated with it? And then you're going to change each attribute one at a time. So if it was black and white or colour, you're going to change it to a more favourable version of that. So if it was red and roaring and inflamed, you might change it to a healing blue. Or if it was black and white, you may change it to a colour that you really love. I wouldn't suggest red if it's pain. If there was a dull ache, can you change it to the feeling of a light, pleasant, fuzzy tingle? And if it was a band of steel, could you break that up to almost like a band of floaty ribbon? And you may find that already just by doing that, the pain or the sensation has changed. And now you're going to imagine you're sitting in front of a movie screen, and you're going to remove the back pain, the sensation from your body, and you're going to put it on the movie screen. And you're going to make the picture on the screen smaller and smaller and smaller until it's the size of a balloon. And now you're going to watch the balloon float up, up, up and away into the sky. And as you see the balloon floating away, you're going to notice that your pain or sensation is getting less and less. And just as the balloon reaches the sky and clouds, you calibrate your backache, and it's just a 1. And as the balloon disappears from sight, the back pain or sensation fades to just the faintest of memories. And just breathe in that sensation and release out anything that isn't serving you. And stay with that sensation for 2 or 3 more breaths. Okay, good. And when you're ready, you just flutter your fingers or your feet or your eyes, and you gently come back into the room. Well done. So that's a handful of neuro-linguistic programming techniques that you may have already heard of, we've already used perhaps. And then I'm just going to mention a handful of things just to then bring it all together. I want to make sure that I've mentioned the ones that you perhaps already know, so that's clear. Things like failing forwards, really noticing what you've achieved so far, all that positive psychology, that all comes into neuro-linguistic programming. Modeling, like if you're modeling yourself on someone successful and how they function, it's another kind of side of neuro-linguistic programming. Another thing that I've used, perhaps if you've had physio or one-to-one coaching with me and you're in a complex situation, I often get you to mark out a timeline of the events, of the significant emotional events. So that's SEE, significant emotional events. I perhaps haven't called them that, but that's what they are. So they can be positive or negative, and you then perhaps come away with a timeline that's enabled us to connect the dots very consciously, because your subconscious may have hidden them for some while. So that is another element of neuro-linguistic programming. We'll go more into that on another training I'll do that will be purely about a timeline method to release negative emotions and limiting beliefs. So there's a fascinating timeline It's called MER, Mental and Emotional Release Technique, that is more of an individual process, but I'll explain more about that another time. And so finally, asking great questions can be a really valuable part of neurolinguistic programming as well. And sometimes we'll find that we have like these limiting beliefs or negative emotions, and we consciously want to let go of them. And yet there's almost like a secondary gain. There's a reason to keep hold on to them. So you'll have perhaps heard me several times in coaching saying something like, what are you gaining from that? What's the benefit of that? And there's no conscious benefit to holding on weight or holding on to pain, or, consciously, of course, we want to let those things go. But somehow there's a secondary gain, and that secondary gain can be conscious or it can be unconscious. Conscious things might be something like, well, if I let go of this thing, this pain, this weight, this thought, this person, then I have no excuses. There's no reason why I can't get on with what I'm saying I can't get on because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah, so it might mean that suddenly you've got to break through to your next level, and that's quite frightening. So you'd rather subconsciously hold yourself back, and it's easier to blame something or someone than believe it's you getting in your own way, because it's not great to think that we're getting on our own way, but we often do. And that's because then there's often these secondary gains. So sometimes asking yourself, and these are the good questions, like, what do I have to gain by holding on to this? And that can often show up with like resentments and forgiveness, is that you feel like you're punishing the other person by being difficult with them or holding on to grudges and all that kind of thing. Whereas we know that really the only person we're usually punishing is ourselves, physically, emotionally. And when we get to the point that we're truly ready to forgive, there's so much healing in that, because not only do we release the other person and cut the cord, but we release ourselves, and that's where the freedom is. So asking yourself really good questions is the NLP part of this. Like, what do I have to gain from this? And another one is like, well, what have I made that mean? So sometimes, for example, we make things mean things, and that's why they become such a problem in our minds. So for example, if you saw a squiggle in your right hand periphery in like primitive times, that could be a snake. It could just be a squiggle on also be a squiggle on a drawing, right? Could be either. We don't know what it is. So do we make it mean the snake, or do we make it mean a squiggly green line on a drawing? The choice is ours. And yet what we find is that we make things mean things the whole time. So meaning that if someone said something to you, or you've heard a criticism, or you've seen something you don't approve of, in your mind, in your framework of the world, you've made it mean something. And that then it becomes a significant emotional event. And that becomes then whether we're either free of these significant emotional events, and we can live like our life unlimited, is one of my taglines, is life unlimited. Or we can build up like a gestalt of these emotions, these significant emotional events and limiting beliefs. And we are then programmed and governed by those inevitably, unless we decide to untangle them. So it's sometimes described almost like a necklace of, if you can imagine, like lots of balls attached together. And if you cut one of the threads, then they all release, okay? So this is why releasing negative emotions, releasing negative beliefs can be so, so powerful, because it then releases everything then ahead of you as well. So I hope that's made sense of how this is so, so powerful. And I'll go into another training to explain a little bit more about processes that we can do more individually together to help that to go even more deeply into this side of things. So any questions about NLP, any of the things I've discussed, anything that sounds a bit strange, anything that's worked for you, do let me know. I always love to hear how you've gotten on, and I'm always happy to answer your questions. Otherwise, comments in the thread, and I hope that's helped.